Hello everyone and welcome back to another Magic the Gathering Commander video. I've been working on this wizard deck for a couple years now. I think I've got it to a pretty good spot. I added some stuff in from Strixhaven, so a couple cards from Strixhaven have been added into the deck. The commander of the deck is Nin the Pain Artist, so just blue and red, 1/1, the Delkin Wizard. So every creature in this deck, it's themed to be a wizard. That's why I'm not running stuff like Stuffy Doll, even though Stuffy Doll would work really well in this deck. It's not in there because it's not a wizard. So anyway, I can pay, use a 1/1, I can pay X and blue and red, and then tap in the Pain Artist to deal X damage to target creature. That creature controller draws X cards. I can use this to eliminate some of my opponent's stronger cards. I can even use it against myself for card draw. Card draw is a huge part of this deck as it is a mill deck essentially. So I could potentially put a bunch of damage into one of my own creatures, draw a bunch of cards, and I have a bunch of cards in my deck that say whenever I draw cards, opponents will mill cards equal to like what I drew, things like that. I have a lot of enchantments in my deck that say whenever I draw a card, opponents mill too, and so on. So that is our commander. We're going to move into our lands here. So we're going to start off with our basic lands. So we're running 14 islands, and we're running 7 mountains. Into the non-basic lands, we're running Academy Ruins, a legendary land that taps for colorless, 1 in a blue. I can tap it to put target artifact card from my graveyard on top of my library. So I have a few artifacts in there that might get destroyed. This will allow me to kind of recur some of those artifacts. We're running Castle Vantress. Enters the battlefield tapped unless you control an island. Taps to add blue, and then I can pay 2 and 2 blue to tap it in Scry 2. So just get a glimpse of what cards I have coming up, and then I can kind of rearrange them as I choose. In any tribal deck, we're running Cavern of Souls. So as it enters the battlefield, choose a creature type. We're going to be choosing wizards, obviously. Tap to add 1 mana to your mana pool, or tap to add 1 mana of any color to your mana pool. Spend this mana only to cast a creature spell of the chosen type, and that spell can't be countered. So basically, I'm going to be tapping this for either red or blue to cast a wizard, and then when that wizard is then uncounterable. After that, we're running an Izzet Boiler Works. Enters tapped, and when it enters the battlefield, return a land you control to its owner's hand, and then on future turns, it taps for both blue and red. We're running a Mystic Sanctuary. Taps for blue. Enters the battlefield tapped unless you control 3 or more other islands. And if it enters the battlefield untapped, you may put target instant or sorcery card from your graveyard on top of your library. So one of the cards I use in this deck that lets me draw quite a lot is Brainstorm. So this will allow me to recur cards like Brainstorm if it enters untapped. We're running Path of Ancestry. Enters the battlefield tapped. Tap to add 1 mana of any color in your commander's color identity. When the mana is spent to cast a creature spell that shares a creature type with your commander, scry 1. So all the creatures are wizards. So basically I'm going to be scrying 1 whenever I play a wizard and tap this land to help pay that cost. We're running a Prismari Campus. Enters tapped. It taps for either blue or red. And I can pay 4 to tap it to scry 1. Again, more ways to kind of just glimpse at what's in my deck. In any card deck with a lot of card draw, we're going to be running Reliquary Tower. I pretty much run this in every commander deck anyway. You have no maximum hand size, and it taps to add 1 colorless. So we're going to be drawing a ton of cards. So this will make it so we don't have to go to our discard phase. Like I said, I use this in this deck. It's particularly useful, but I use Reliquary Tower in pretty much every commander deck anyway. In case I'm playing against an opponent that is running cards that make me draw, like a mine, like Nekuzar decks and stuff like that. This will allow me not to go to a discard phase when I'm drawing cards. Another really important card in the deck is the Riptide Laboratory. Taps to add adds 1 or 1 in a blue. I can tap it to return target wizard you control to its owner's hand. So an opponent tries to target one of your wizards with a spell or one of my wizards. I can pay 1 in a blue, tap the Riptide Laboratory, and return the wizard to my hand to basically prevent that spell from really having an effect. If I have wizards that have enter the battlefield effects, I can basically trigger those multiple times. So cast a wizard, let it do its thing, has its effect triggers. I can then pay 1 in a blue to tap this land to return the wizard to my hand to cast it again later to get another use out of that trigger. So that's that. We have a River Glide Pathway. So it just taps to add blue, and it's a flip land from Zendikar. So on the other side is the Lava Glide Pathway. So depending on what I need more of at any moment, I can either cast it for its red side or its blue side there. Next land, we're running Spire Bluff Canal. So enters the battlefield tapped unless you control 2 or fewer other lands, and then just taps for blue or red. We're running a Steam Vents. Taps for either blue or red. It enters the battlefield tapped, though, unless you pay 2 life. If you pay 2 life, if you don't pay 2 life, it enters tapped. Basically, enters untapped if you pay 2 life. We're running Sulphur Falls. Enters the battlefield tapped unless you control an island or a mountain, and then taps for either blue or red. And finally, we have Vesuva. Enters the battlefield tapped as a copy of any land on the battlefield. So my lands or my opponent's lands. So let's say I want to have, just to be extra safe, I want to have another copy of Cavernous Souls. I can basically cast this and then have it enter as a copy of Cavernous Souls. Because Cavernous Souls, I do not believe, Cavernous Souls is not a legendary land. So Vesuva basically allows me to have that happen multiple times. We're going to move up into our artifacts. So we are running Chromatic Lantern, cost 3. Lands you control have tap to add 1 mana of any color, and then it itself taps to add 1 of any color. So kind of like allows me to kind of do a little bit of mana fixing depending on, what lands I have in play. And of course this is cool because it allows me to also just tap the Lantern for 1 mana. We're running a Fire Diamond, so just cost 2, enters tapped, and allows me to tap for red. We are running Ice Conceptor. So 2 mana, it's an artifact that has imprint. When it comes into play, you may remove an instant card, an instant card with mana cost 2 or less in your hand from the game, and then it gets imprinted onto the scepter. You can then pay 2 mana to tap it you may copy the imprinted instant card and play the copy without paying its mana cost. So like something like Counterspell, I can basically just have Counterspell on this card, or any of my other instants that cost 2 or less. It's pretty flexible as what I can do with it, but cards like Brainstorm work really well with it. We have the Lithoform Engine, 4 mana, it's a legendary artifact. Pretty versatile because it has 3 different options. So for 2 mana, I can tap it to copy target activated or triggered ability I control. You may choose new targets for the copy. So basically, if an ability triggers on one of my permanents, I can basically copy that ability with that. Or I can pay 3 to copy target instant or sorcery spell you control. You may choose new targets for the copy. So something like Brainstorm works well here because basically I get 2 copies of Brainstorm with by using the 3 mana option. Or 4 mana, tap it to copy target permanent spell you control. So if I have a certain wizard I want to have trigger again, or just have multiple copies of a certain wizard, I can pay 4 to copy a permanent. I can copy any of my milling enchantments. So basically, whenever I draw a card, each of those million, I would have the real copy and then the copy created by this Lithoform engine, and that'll allow me to have basically more mill go off. We have Mind's Eye, 5 mana. I said resources for a reason. So for some reason, whenever an opponent draws a card, I can pay 1 to do 1. If I do, I draw a card as well. So I have a lot of enchantments that trigger off a card draw, so this will allow me to get more mill by basically just paying 1 whenever my opponents draw cards. We have Sky Diamond, so 2 mana, enters tapped, and then taps for blue. Pretty simple. We have Soul Ring, staple in pretty much every commander deck. 1 mana, and then taps for 2 colorless. We have the Magic Mirror, cost 6 and 3, so 9 mana total. Spell costs 1 less to cast for each instant and sorcery card in your graveyard. You have no maximum hand size. And then at the beginning of your upkeep, put a knowledge counter on the Magic Mirror, then draw a card for each knowledge counter on the Magic Mirror. So the longer this is out, the more extra cards you're getting to draw, the more mill that you get to do, and so on. We have Thran Dynamo, 4 mana, and then it taps for 3 colorless. And finally, we have Vanquisher's Banner. I have 2 versions of this card, so I actually ended up buying the Time Spiral version just because it looks so much cooler, I think. Anyway, 5 mana. So it enters the battlefield, choose a creature type. So obviously you can be choosing wizards. Creatures you control of the chosen type get +1/+1. And whenever you cast a creature spell of the chosen type, draw a card. So every time you play a wizard, you're going to get a draw card, and then trigger even more mill off of that. We're going to move into our creatures now. We have Arcanist the Omnipotent, 3 colorless and 3 blue for 6 mana total. Wizard, He taps to draw 3, so pretty self-explanatory there. You tap him, you draw 3. Your milling enchantments go off, and so on. And then for 2 and 2 blue, you can return them to your hand. So he gets targeted by something. Let's say you don't have Riptide Laboratory out, you want to bounce him, you can basically return him with that. We have Archmage Emergence, I think I'm pronouncing that correctly. 2 and 2 blue for a 2/2 wizard with Magecraft. So whenever you cast an instant or sorcery, whenever you cast or copy an instant or sorcery spell, draw a card. So basically, whenever you cast an instant, you're going to get to draw a card with him, which will trigger more mill, which is good. We have a zombie, Lady of Scrolls. So 2 colorless and 3 blue for a 0/2, and tap an untapped wizard you control to draw a card. So just if you have a bunch of wizards out, you basically can tap them. For each wizard you tap, you get to draw a card. Again, every time you draw a card, I could be doing milling as well. We have Baral, Chief of Compliance, 1 in a blue for a 1/3. Instant and sorcery spells you cast cost 1 less to cast. And whenever a spell or ability you control counters a spell, you may draw a card. If you do, discard a card. So even more card draw there. We have Drowner Initiate, so 1 blue for a 1/1. Whenever a player plays a blue spell, you may pay 1. If you do, target player puts the top 2 cards of their library into their graveyard. So basically, whenever I play a blue spell, I can also then play 1 additional to trigger the Drowner Initiate to basically have my opponent's mill. Just another creature that is good for getting cards out of my opponent's deck and into their graveyards. We have Gadwick the Wizened. So X and 3 blue for a 3/3. When it enters the battlefield, draw X cards. So again, milling will happen with that. And whenever you cast a blue spell, tap target non-land permanent in opponent control. So you can start tapping their creatures, tapping certain things, and make it so they can't use it until their next turn. Pretty good. We have Jace, Vryn's Prodigy. So 1 in a blue for a 0/2. Tap to draw a card, then discard a card. If there are 5 or more cards in your graveyard, exile Jace, Vryn's Prodigy, then return it to the battlefield transformed under his owner's control. So this is the only Planeswalker I actually have in the deck. And the only reason I have him in the deck is that he starts off as a wizard. So he flips over then to Jace, Telepath Unbound. Comes in with 5 loyalty. +1 to put a loyalty on him. Up to 1 target creature gets -2/-0 until your next turn. -3, you may cast target instant or sorcery card from your graveyard this turn. If the card will be put into a graveyard this turn, exile instead. So basically, he is like a Snapcaster Mage at that level almost. And then -9, you get an emblem with whenever you cast a spell, target opponent puts the top 5 cards of their library into their graveyard. So if you can get the ultimate to trigger, basically whenever you cast a spell, they're going to be milling 5 cards, which is pretty good. So that is Jace. We just got to scroll back up here. Next up, we have Causa, Royal Chaser. 1 in a red for a 1/2 with flying and haste. Tap the next instant or sorcery spell you cast. This turn costs X less to cast, where that is the number of wizards you control as the ability resolves. So basically, really good way. It's another wizard in the deck, and then it's another way to kind of just get some instants or sorcerers out for less. We have Laboratory Maniac, so 2 in a blue for a 2/2. If you withdraw a card while your library has no cards in it, you win the game instead. I actually ended up buying the Time Spiral version of this card just because I think it looks awesome. But you basically just draw up a ton of cards, and if you have him in play, you can basically just tap and untap. Like, let's say you are using a zombie to tap untap wizards. You can basically tap one of your untapped wizards with no cards in your library, and if Laboratory Maniac is in play, you win the game. Pretty good. Next up, we have Lighthouse Chronologists, so 1 in a blue for a 1/3 that can level up to a 2/4 and a 3/5, depending on how what level you get into. And level up, you pay blue to put a level counter on it. Level up only as a sorcery. So level 1, it's a 1/3. Level 4 to 6, it's a 2/4. And at level 7, this is level 7 plus, it's where it gets interesting. It becomes a 3/5. And at the beginning of each end step, if it's not your turn, take an extra turn after this one. So, in a 2-player game, I'll go. My opponent goes. I get to go again. I get to then take my main turn as well. So basically, at the end of each other player's turn, you get an extra turn. That's just pretty good. And you can level up if you have enough mana. You can level up all at one time as well. Next up, we have the Mercurial Chemister, 3 and blue and a red for a 2/3. And has 2 different abilities. So if you pay blue to tap it, you can draw 2 cards. Pretty good. And red, tap it to discard a card, and then it deals damage to target creature equal to the discarded card's converted mana cost. I don't really use that ability, though. I'm mostly using it to just be another wizard on the field, as well as paying the blue to draw 2. Now, next up, we have the Merfolk Secret Keeper. 1 blue for a 0/4. Has an adventure on it, so basically you would play it as a creature for 1 blue, or you can play it for an adventure for 1 blue. If you do the adventure, target player puts the top 4 cards of the library into their graveyard, and then it gets exiled, and then you can play it out of exile for 1 blue, where it enters as a creature. If you have an effect like the Reptile Laboratory, you can then return it to your hand, and then play it for its adventure again, and then recast it as a creature, and then just do that. And every time it enters the battlefield, or every time you do the adventure half of the card, it will basically mill 4 cards. Next up, we have Mizzium Meddler, 2 in a blue for a 1/4 with flash. When it enters the battlefield, you may change a target spell or ability to Mizzium Meddler. So, somebody wants to destroy one of my creatures, for example, creatures I don't really want to lose. I can basically flash in this creature and redirect that spell to this creature instead of the creature it was originally targeting. So, way to kind of control where your opponent's spells actually go. Pretty good there. Next up, we have Niv Mizzet, Draco Genius. So, 2 blue, 2 red, so 6 mana for a 5/5 of flying. When it deals damage to a player, you may draw a card, and then for blue and red, it deals 1 damage to target creature or player. So again, more card draw with this, so it'll allow me to trigger my milling enchantments and all that kind of stuff. We're actually running all 3 versions of Niv Mizzet, and that are in blue and red at least. So Niv Mizzet Patron is 3 blue, 3 red for a 5/5. Can't be countered, has flying. Whenever you draw a card, Niv Mizzet Patron deals 1 damage to any target. So basically, whenever you draw a card, he's going to be pinging stuff for 1. And whenever a player casts an instant or sorcery spell, draw a card. That's just not my card. Instant or sorcery says whenever a player, so my opponents are playing spells, I get to draw cards. Whenever I play spells or instants or sorceries specifically, I get to draw a card. So just massive card draw, and then can ping damage, and the cool thing, can't be countered as well. And finally, for the Niv Mizzets, we have Niv Mizzet the Firemind. 2 blue, 2 red for a 4/4 with flying. And whenever you draw a card, Niv Mizzet deals 1 damage to any target, and then you can tap him to draw a card. So again, just tapping to draw a card will allow me to do more mill, which is good. We have Omnispell Adept, 4 in a blue for a 3/4, and then for 2 in a blue, I can tap it to cast an instant or sorcery card from my hand without paying its mana cost. So anything that is a higher mana cost spell, I can basically get out for 3 mana with this just by paying 2 in a blue and tapping it. Another really key card in the deck is the Patron Wizard. So 3 blue for a 2/2. Tap an untapped wizard you control to counter target spell unless its controller pays 1. So really good way to have basically just like counter spell pretty much ready whenever I want. They can respond to it by paying 1, but then at that point I can just tap another wizard to have them pay 1 again. So good way to counter stuff with that. We have the Sage of Epityr. 1 blue for a 1/1. When it comes into play, enters the battlefield. Look at the top 4 cards of your library, put them back in any order. Nice way to kind of just stack your deck in a way that will be more beneficial to you. Next up, we have the Seagate Stormcaller. So 1 in a blue for a 2/1. Has a kicker of 4 in a blue. And when it enters the battlefield, copy the next instant or sorcery spell with converted mana cost 2 or less you cast this turn. When you cast it, if it was kicked, copy the spell twice instead. You may choose new targets for the copies. So basically for is 5 for 7 mana, I can basically play this and then play Brainstorm and basically copy Brainstorm. Like you have a normal copy of Brainstorm and then 2 additional copies of Brainstorm, which allows you to basically draw a total of 9 cards. And if I have my milling enchantments in play, they're going to be generally milling 2 cards per card drawn, which is pretty good. So that is the Seagate Stormcaller. Next up, we have Snapcaster Mage. 1 in a blue for a 2/1. Has flash, and when it enters the battlefield, target instant sorcery card in your graveyard gains flashback. Until the end of turn, flashback cost is equal to its mana cost. So basically, I can flashback something like Brainstorm. Brainstorm's a key card in the deck, so get that. Get another copy out of Brainstorm of that, or any other instant or sorcery that's in my graveyard. After that, we have Spellseeker. So 2 in a blue for a 1/1. When it enters the battlefield, you may search your library for an instant or sorcery card with converted mana cost 2 or less. Reveal it, put it into your hand, then shuffle your library. So that allows me to basically to tutor Brainstorm out of my deck. Next up, we have Teferi, Mage of Zalafir. 2 and 3 blue for a 3/4. Flash. Creature cards you own that aren't on the battlefield have flash, and each opponent can cast spells only anytime they can cast a sorcery. So basically, they can't play stuff on my turn, essentially. Next up, we have the Vendilion Click. 1 and 2 blue for a 3/1 with flash and flying. When it enters the battlefield, look at a target opponent's hand. Choose a non-land card from it. If you do, that player reveals a card and puts it on the bottom of their library, then draws a card. So, like your opponent like tutors for something, they grab whatever they're tutoring for. If it's like if they show it to you, if there's a card like they have to reveal it, they reveal it. You basically then just flash and Vendilion Click and put that card back on the bottom of their library, or any other card in their hand that you don't want to have to particularly deal with. It can go on the bottom of their deck. After that, we have Venser, Shaper Savant, 2 and 2 blue for a 2/2. Has flash, and when it enters the battlefield, return target spell or permanent to its owner's hand. So a good way to bounce something. So your opponent then has to basically like delays a turn with that. So that's Venser. After that, we have Veyran, Voice of Duality. Pretty much bought the Prismari Commander deck for this card alone, almost. This card is huge in this deck. So, 1 blue and red for a 2/2 wizard. Has Magecraft, so whenever you cast or copy an instant or sorcery spell, it gets +1/+1 until the end of turn. That's not the big part of the card that I'm using it for. It's this part. So if you casting or copying an instant or sorcery spell causes a triggered ability of a permanent you control to trigger, that ability triggers an additional time. So something like Brainstorm with this. Basically, I play Brainstorm, draw cards, and then me drawing cards by playing that spell would cause those million enchantments to go off again. The wizard allows me to draw cards whenever I cast an instant or sorcery. That would trigger again, and so on. So this is a huge card in the deck. I was considering just buying this as a single, and I'm like, okay, cool. Like the deck is like whatever the price of the deck is. I forgot exactly how much I paid for it, but this card, at least when the decks were brand new, like a couple weeks ago, was like a $25 card at least. And then the deck, so I'm like, I'll just buy the deck. I'll get this card plus the 99 other cards that also are would be good as well. And after that, so that is the Voice of Duality. We have Willbender. So 1 in a blue for a 1/2 with Morph. So you can pay 3, and it becomes basically a 2/2, and then I can pay the Morph cost later of 1 in a blue. When it's turn face up, change the target of target spell or ability with a single target. So opponent plays something that, like, let's say they're trying to destroy one of my creatures. I can basically flip it over, and then I can change the target of that spell to a different creature. So, like, they want to kill one of my creatures, I can basically just flip it over and have that whatever spell they're using to destroy my creature hit one of their creatures instead. So that's pretty good. So those are all of the creatures. We're going to move into our enchantments now. So first up, we have Drowned Secrets, so 1 in a blue. Whenever you cast a blue spell, target player puts the top 2 cards of their library into their graveyard. So a lot of my cards are going to be blue, so this will allow me to basically, whenever I play a blue spell, my opponents are milling 2 cards. We have Jace's Sanctum, so 3 in a blue. So instant and sorcery spells you cast cost 1 less, and whenever you cast an instant or sorcery spell, scry 1. Pretty good. Pretty self-explanatory. Allows you to kind of look at your deck to see what's coming up. We have Memory Erosion, so 1 and 2 blue. Whenever an opponent casts a spell, that player puts the top 2 cards of their library into their graveyard. So basically, every time they play a spell, they're going to be milling 2 while this is in play. Next up, we have Psychic Corrosion. So 2 in a blue. One of the main milling cards in this deck. So again, 2 in a blue. Whenever you draw a card, each opponent puts the top 2 cards of their library into their graveyard. Again, goes off multiple times with something like Brainstorm. We have Reflections of Litjara. So 4 in a blue. As it enters the battlefield, choose a creature type. So we'll be choosing wizards. Whenever you cast a spell that shows in type, copy the spell. So basically, let's say I play a Snapcaster. I play Snapcaster. This goes off. I get another copy of Snapcaster, and then it also combos with the Riptide Laboratory, because then I can basically like pay 1 in a blue, tap the Laboratory, return the real Snapcaster to my hand while the copy is still out, and then play the Snapcaster again later, or any other wizard. So So basically, whenever a wizard enters the battlefield, I get a copy of that wizard. So legendary wizards, it won't really have much of an effect on it, but something like like the Spellseeker or the Patron Wizard or basically any wizard that isn't legendary, I'll get to have copies that stick around, which is pretty good. We have Rethink Study, so 2 and a blue. Whenever an opponent casts a spell, I may draw a card unless that opponent pays 1. So in a deck where they're going to be milling cards really quickly, they're probably going to be paying that 1 to prevent me from drawing. So that kind of messes with their mana. And then if they don't want to pay the 1, I get to draw an additional card. And that by doing that, I will get to mill more cards. We have also has Sphinx's Tutelage, another really real key milling card here. So 2 and a blue. Whenever you draw a card, a target opponent puts the top 2 cards of their library into their graveyard. If they're both non-land cards that share a color, repeat the process. So I keep using Brainstorm as the example, but Brainstorm causes this to trigger 3 times. So you get 3 triggers on Sphinx's Tutelage. So we're going to be milling at least 6 cards. And then if so, let's say you do 1 trigger, they're both blue. That trigger continues until the colors don't match or they are lands, or like if they're both non-land cards. So basically that share colors. So they have to share colors, but then that's only 1 trigger. So 1 trigger could get you multiple cards like discarded. You're getting at least 2 cards discarded with it, potentially even more if the colors match. And then on top of that, you can pay 5 and a blue to draw a card and discard a card. I probably won't be using that. I probably don't use that ability just because it's kind of expensive. But if I really need a card draw, I can basically just draw a card with that and then have my opponents mill even more of that. We have Teferis Ageless Insight, so 2 and 2 blue. If you would draw a card, except the first one you draw each turn, or during your draw step, draw 2 cards instead. So basically, every time I use a thing that would make me draw a card, aside from my normal draw card, or my draw, I get to draw 2. So this allows me to just draw a ton of cards and mill a bunch of cards as well. Next up is Teferis Tutelage. When it enters the battlefield, draw a card and then discard a card. And whenever you draw a card, target opponent mills 2 cards. So another milling enchantment. And then finally we have Thousand Year Storm. So 4 and blue and red. Whenever you cast an instant or sorcery spell, a copy for each other instant or sorcery spell you've cast before it this turn. You may choose new targets for the copy. So again, if I play a bunch of stuff before this and then play Brainstorm, I get just a ton of copies of Brainstorm with a ton of milling as well. We're going to move into our instance now. So first up here for our instance, we have Blue Sun Zenith. I don't have the Japanese version, but basically I think Cockatrice is showing this one. But basically it's X and 3 blue. You do it, you basically draw X cards and then shuffle Blue Sun Zenith back into your library. So just tons of card draw with it, tons of mill if my enchantments are in play. Next up we have is Boomerang. So 2 blue, just return target permanent to its owner's hand. Pretty simple, but a good way to get rid of some of my opponent's stuff, or even bounce a. If I don't have Riptide Laboratory, I'm trying to get rid of one of my creatures, I can pay 2 blue to return to my hand. Next up, we have Brainstorm. Again, real key card in the deck. So 1 blue, draw 3 cards, then put 2 cards from your hand on top of your library in any order. So basically, every time with Brainstorm in my milling enchantments, it's going to be milling. They're going to be milling 6 cards per. Let's say I only have 1 milling enchantment in play. I'll draw 3. Let's say it's only Psychic Corrosion, which is every time I draw they mill 2. So 1 copy of Brainstorm without anything else out, and just Psychic Corrosion is milling 6 cards. And then this can get copied multiple times. I can throw this into the Ice Conceptor. I can basically use the Seagate Oracle to copy this multiple times, something like Thousand Year Storm. Basically, if I play a bunch of stuff before it, I can get multiple copies of Brainstorm. Just a real versatile card in this deck. I can get a ton of card draw and a ton of mill with it. Next up we have Cancel, so 1 and 2 blue just to counter target spell. We have the classic counter spell, just 2 blue to counter a spell. Dramatic Reversal, 1 and a blue, untap all non-land permanents you control. So I could also throw this into Ice Conceptor just to basically just have a bunch of stuff go off to where I can basically use it with my commander to untap my commander and then have it do more card draw with her ability to hit something for damage, so I can do it to my own creatures. So that is a good way to basically just to untap all your non-land permanents, and then you can potentially almost get infinite amount of, not turns, but basically as long as you have a 2 mana open, you can basically cast it again out of the Ice Conceptor, and just like you can use all your creatures again and all that kind of stuff. So there's dramatic reversal. We have Essence Scatter, so 1 in a blue to counter target creature spell. Hydroblast, to choose one, you can either counter target spell if it's red or destroy a red permanent. We have Psychic Rebuttal, 1 in a blue to counter target instant or sorcery spell that targets you. And then it has Spell Mastery, so if there are 2 or more instants or sorceries in your graveyard, you may copy the spell countered this way, and then choose new copies for it. So, opponent casts a spell, I counter it. That's basically what it does right away. But let's say I have Spell Mastery, so they cast a spell, I counter it, I can then copy the spell and redirect the spell to them, which is good. We have Psychic Spiral, so 4 and a blue. Shuffle all cards from your graveyard into your library. Then that target player puts it and basically mills that many. So let's say I shuffle 20 cards in, they mill 20. We have the Red Elemental Blast, so it's just 1 red to either, basically it's the reverse of the Hydroblast, I believe. So choose one to counter target blue spell or destroy a blue permanent. Through that we have Rethink, which is 2 in a blue to counter target spell unless its controller pays X, where X is the spell's mana cost. So basically, just it's a counter spell, and if they don't have, let's say it's a 4 cost spell, I pay 3 to cast Rethink, and let's say they only have 4 mana, they're not gonna be able to pay X because they won't have any mana. So basically, it's another counter spell. We have a Revolutionary Rebuff, 1 in the blue to counter target non-artifact spell unless its controller pays 2. So good amount of counter spells in the deck as well. We have Turn Aside, so 1 blue, counter target spell that targets a permanent you control. And finally, we have Wizard's Retort. 1 and 2 blue, it costs 1 less to cast if you control a wizard. Counter target spell, so basically, since I have all my creatures are wizards, it turns it into just the original counter spell. So there's our instance. We're going to move into our sorceries. We only have a couple of them. So first sorcery up is Denying Wind. So 7 and 2 blue. It's a high mana cost spell, but it's really effective. So search target player's library for up to 7 cards and remove them from the game. That player then shuffles their library. So basically, it exiles 7. So a lot of cards, like anti-mill cards, like some of the Eldrazi that say when they hit the graveyard, their graveyard just gets shuffled back into their deck. This will allow me to pull out those Eldrazi and exile them so I can continue milling. And finally, we have Enter the Infinite. So 8 and 4. So it's going to cost 12 mana. I can reduce the cost of that by something like by using Causa. If I have like 8 wizards, it's only going to cost me 4 blue. Or the Omnispell Adept, where I can pay 2 in a blue to basically cast it without paying the mana cost. So you draw cards equal to the number of cards in your library, then put a card from your hand on top of your library. You have no maximum hand size. So basically, with my milling enchantments, this will pretty much mill out an opponent in one shot, basically. So that is the deck. I don't think there's anything we missed. We covered our lands, we covered our sorceries, we covered our instants, our enchantments, our creatures, and our artifacts. So again, the commander for this deck is Nin the Pain Artist. And again, we're using her to mostly use her ability to get rid of opponent's creatures by having her pump damage into them. They get to draw cards in response to it. Or I can also use her to draw cards myself. So also pretty decent commander as it's just 2 mana. So it's probably the cheapest commander you're going to be able to get in red or blue, unless you're like it was like hybrid mana, like one of like you choose either red or blue. But 2 mana. So basically, if she goes to the graveyard or gets killed, basically, she comes back starts with 2, 4, 6, and so on. So she's a very affordable commander as far as her casting cost. And then again, essentially, it's just a wizard mill deck. So basically, I'm just using a bunch of milling enchantments and a bunch of cards and creatures and effects that give me massive amounts of card draw to then, whenever I draw cards, my opponents mill cards, and I'll have them be basically just burning through our decks very quickly. Unless they happen to have something like I said, like an Eldrazi, that once it hits their graveyard, it shuffles in. That is one of the kind of weak points of the deck, is that it will always lose to those kind of decks, unless I can get something like, what was it called again? Denying Wind into play and get multiple uses out of Denying Wind. So if I play a spell, let's say I play Denying Wind, I can actually, if I have enough mana, I can then copy Denying Wind and do it to multiple opponents. Denying Wind is the only way to really affect my opponent's decks, to where if they are running cards that say once it hits the graveyard, shuffle your library into your your graveyard into your library. So that'll allow me to get cards like that out of the deck. So that again, without that card, that's kind of a weak point to the deck. Is that some of the original Eldrazi cards from the original Zendikar block are kind of a way to prevent this deck from fully winning. But that's kind of a minor issue. Again, I've been working on this deck for a couple years. I'm probably going to have to revisit the deck again in a few months once the Dungeons and Dragons set come out, because I imagine there's going to be a good amount of wizards in that deck as well, or in that set. So once that comes out, I may make changes to the deck. But this is the deck for now. I've had a lot of fun with it. I've been playing it for probably a couple years, but I haven't really had a chance to physically play it in probably over a year with the with like events not really happening at stores and people not getting together. Hopefully, once everything is kind of like open again, I can bring this out to some of the local game stores and just play some games of Commander with it. But that's going to do it for this video. Remember to like, comment, share, and subscribe. We'll see you again next time. Thanks again for watching, and take care.